title slide says, Organizational Readiness and Retention for People with Lived Expertise.
Welcome, everyone, to our Organizational Readiness and Retention for People with Lived Expertise session. We are so glad that you could join us here today. Next slide, please. So my name is Kelly Kirk, and I'm a family consultant with the Capacity Building Center for States. And I will also share that I have lived expertise in child welfare and work in a North Carolina child welfare agency. So I'm excited to be here with you all today.
And my name is Tiffany Haynes. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a lived experience engagement specialist here at the Capacity Building Center for States. Next slide, please.
So during this session, we will focus on three main learning objectives. First, we're going to look at identifying some of the key organizational readiness considerations for how to integrate folks with lived expertise effectively. And then we'll talk about some of the strategies that agencies can use to retain those with lived expertise within the workforce. And finally, we will share and highlight a few organizations who have successfully integrated people with lived expertise. Next slide, please. So here's our agenda, and we're going to start out by setting the stage, move to assessing and building readiness, then strategies for retaining folks with lived expertise, celebrating organizational successes, and then have a question and answer before we close out. And I will lead us into the material, and then I will pass it to my partner, Tiffany. So next slide, please. So before we jump into the presentation, we wanted to define the term lived expertise by contrasting the difference between lived experience and lived expertise. And these terms are very similar, but there is a difference between them. So lived experience is when someone has interacted with or had an experience with child welfare or is currently having an experience with child welfare. Whereas lived expertise is when that person takes that personal experience and develops it into something that can be used in a positive way to affect meaningful system change. And that takes time, support, development, and training. And so we will focus today on lived expertise. So next slide, please. So when we think about having people with lived expertise within our workforce, it's an excellent idea for organizations to start out by creating or adopting a strategy, a practice, or a model for engaging people with lived expertise that can serve as a roadmap and kind of guide them as they move through the process. And this slide shows the model that the Capacity Building Center for States uses for working with their lived expertise partners. And there's a lot of great information on this slide, so I'll kind of break it down. So the inner circle lists the ways to engage people with lived expertise in the work. So there's inform, consult, involve, collaborate, and empower. And the outer circle reflects ways people can be supported throughout their engagement: prepare, consult, support, debrief, evaluate, and celebrate. Then on the left are strategies that can be used to support those with lived expertise while they're being engaged and supported. And many of these build on one another. So encouraging open and respectful communication is always a great foundational standard. Offering competitive compensation will help advance your recruitment efforts, and it demonstrates that you value what they're contributing. Supporting them logistically whenever possible. Creating space for your staff with lived expertise to learn from and support one another. Sharing clear expectations and defining roles and limitations really helps to set the stage for success. Consider empowering folks by providing opportunities for them to build their leadership skills and being supportive of their professional development. You can provide coaching and encouragement, And I know as someone with lived expertise in the child workforce myself, this is something that I really appreciate. And then as I expand my capabilities, that also adds value to my contribution within the agency. Bidirectional feedback helps to ensure that there's open, transparent communication and builds trusting relationships. And then over on the right side are other key factors to keep in mind. Providing feedback promptly and being open to accepting feedback and utilizing active listening. Being inclusive and respectful of their story, their contribution, and the skills and knowledge that they have, even outside of their lived experiences. Being open to new ideas and ways of thinking about things, and being aware and mindful of current events that might affect your lived expertise staff, and making space for them to feel psychologically safe really helps to build that trust. Being strengths-based and trauma-informed. These are common terms, but if you can really embed these practices into your agency's culture, it sets an example for others and it lays a solid foundation for what you're trying to accomplish. Engaging early and often. An example of this might be to have your lived expertise people at the table from the inception of a project, rather than asking them for their input after policy's already been written. You would be surprised how helpful and innovative it can be to have these unique perspectives and voices at the table, especially in child welfare. I always say that making policy without the input of the families that you're serving is like a doctor writing a prescription without ever asking the patient about their symptoms. So also building in enough time to allow space for people with lived expertise and other staff to engage with each other meaningfully. Assessing and reassessing how things are going, asking for input, identifying any pain points, and working together as a team to come up with solutions. And there are other models out there that you could adopt or kind of learn from. One of them that's popular is the Hart's Ladder of Participation, and there are others. But this model will be available immediately after the presentation if you guys want to take a look at it. And if anyone has any other examples of a model or a strategy or a practice that you've heard of or that you're utilizing, we would love for you all to share those with us in the chat. Okay, next slide, please.
Slide titled, Benefits of Integrating Professionals with Lived Expertise in the Workforce has 3 categories. The first, for programs and initiatives, has 3 points. 1. Improved ability to deliver responsive services, programming, training, and technical assistance. 2. Institutional knowledge representative of priority populations to strengthen products, tools, and resources. 3. Added credibility and insight into the challenges and opportunities inherent to serving systems-impacted individuals. The second, for agencies, has 3 points. 1. Increased internal capacity to review agency policies and practices through a lived experience lens. 2. Opportunity to engage lived experience staff as thought partners to address challenging and complex issues. 3. Demonstration of the value of lived expertise and authentic engagement. The third, for individuals with lived experience, there are 4 points. 1. Improved awareness and knowledge about strengths, needs, challenges, and systemic barriers. 2. Further developed professional skills. 3. Increased self-efficacy and empowerment. 4. Strengthened community connectedness and social and emotional support.
So what are some of the benefits of incorporating and integrating professionals with lived expertise in the workforce? This slide lays out a whole host of benefits that was taken from the methods and emerging strategies to engage people with lived experience brief, excuse me, from the Department of Health and Human Services. And it's divided into 3 categories. So there's benefits for the programs and initiatives, for agencies, and for individuals with lived expertise. Some initiatives, especially those that involve legislatively mandated advisory groups or research commissions, reported an improved ability to deliver responsive services, programming, training, and technical assistance. Informants in this report noted that making advisory groups more representative of the priority populations strengthened products, tools, and resources by making them more accessible, responsive, and tailored to the specific needs of the priority populations. And finally, their environmental scan showed that lived experience engagements within initiatives that were reviewed had results in improved representation and increased priority communities' influence on decision-making processes and practices. Benefits for agencies. By informing federal agency-wide strategies and decisions, engagement of people with lived experience has contributed to new or improved federal policies and practices. And these improvements included directing funding and resources towards the priority populations, concerns, and needs, and enhanced service and delivery infrastructure, including mechanisms for ongoing and sustained engagement of lived experience experts. Engagement also created informed and empowered groups of advocates who had extensive networks and who have the skills to speak directly to agencies and decision makers about the needs of the priority populations that they represent. And then finally, benefits for individuals. Federal staff noted that they gained an improved awareness and knowledge about the strengths, needs, challenges, and systemic barriers experienced by the priority communities they served. And they further developed professional skills to reach and engage individuals in these communities. Those with lived experience who engage with federal initiatives noted benefits such as increased self-efficacy and empowerment, strengthened community connectedness and social and emotional support, and a better understanding of federal programs and agencies. So it's really a win-win. It improves outcomes and attitudes, and it benefits the people with lived expertise and the agencies themselves. Next slide, please. So what are some of the other benefits of integrating lived expertise in the workforce? If you all have examples, we would love for you to share those with us in the chat. Tiffany, did you have any that you would like to share?
Actually, I do, Kelly. So one is that offering opportunities for people with lived expertise offers space for them to be able to provide feedback, but also it creates opportunity to enhance service delivery within your organization.
I totally agree. Next slide, please.
All right. So let's talk about some things that should be considered in organizational readiness. Here on the screen, you'll see the Center for States' 5 dimensions of capacity building. The first is culture and climate, which includes norms, beliefs, values, and attitudes that influence behavior, such as shared vision, goals, morale and motivation, openness, and buy-in for new programs and practices. Next is engagement and partnership. This includes inter-organizational and intra-organizational relationships, such as internal teaming, connections, stakeholder involvement, communications, and interagency collaboration. Next is knowledge and skills. And this dimension focuses on expertise and competencies, for example, practice knowledge, leadership skills, team building, analytic abilities, and cultural responsiveness. Then we have infrastructure, which includes organizational structures and processes, such as policies, procedures, governance structures, service arrays, decision-making processes, practice protocols, training, human resources systems, and quality improvement systems. And lastly, resources, which includes concrete materials and assets such as staff, funding, facilities, equipment, data collection tools and systems, informational and program materials, curricula, and technology. So in the chat, I'm going to ask that you all take some time to share how your organization has integrated lived experience. All right, so I see someone wrote that they have a parent advisory council and they are a fantastic insight. Thank you for sharing that. All right, next slide, please. Now we're going to move into strategies for assessing readiness. These strategies were pulled by 2 resources listed at the bottom of the screen. And as we go through each dimension area, drop your strategies for them in the chat. First, we're going to go over strategies for culture and climate. First would be create safe, comfortable spaces for lived experience staff to express themselves and to develop their leadership skills. You can also work to establish effective partnerships that include shared responsibilities, communication, and power sharing. Be clear about the goals of the organization and organizational engagement. And lastly, increase awareness of opportunities to provide and receive feedback through formal and informal processes. Some ways that I've seen this happen is through focus groups, listening sessions, surveys, and polls, and even through group conversations within the team. The next is engagement and partnership dimension. One way would be to develop mentorship programs, internships, externships, and community partnerships. For me, I'm actually currently in a mentorship program at my job, and it has really helped me to navigate the corporate environment. Creating spaces like that could also support other people with lived experience, as well as just your general staff with learning curves and opportunities to engage and develop community. The next is engage in networks of lived experience folks to assist with building capacity for those involved with your organization and to increase recruitment. Next would be to connect with organizations that have successfully integrated people with lived experience and expertise. An example of how this could be implemented would be to discuss organizational, shared, and personal values, and then even establish and co-create space agreements. Now we're going to move into knowledge and skills. One way would be to build capacity for engagement with those with lived experience by providing adequate job guidance and training. Another way would be to recognize those with lived experience and expertise as experts. We all bring different levels of expertise, so create space for that. Lastly, would be to break down stereotypes that people may have to facilitate better communication at your organization. So some examples of how you could build on your knowledge and skills dimension would be to ensure that there are equitable opportunities for people with lived experience to practice and share knowledge and skills, as well as enhancing team building skills to integrate people with lived experience to teams to be intentional and thoughtful. Next slide, please. Moving on to our last 2 dimension areas, please continue to drop in the chat any strategies for assessing readiness that your organization may utilize. Now we're going to start with infrastructure. Provide training and support to staff that supervise those with lived expertise. Involve those with lived expertise in the hiring process, as well as recruitment and training. Include those with lived expertise in the evaluation of organizational policies, procedures, governance, and outcomes. Seek buy-in from institutional leaderships to create policies to support engagement. And lastly, develop a fair compensation for employees in your organization on par with that of other workers. Some examples of how you could do this is to ensure that there's clarity on how people with lived experience are onboarded and offboarded to projects and teams. Ensure that there are equitable opportunities for people with lived experience to practice knowledge and skills. And another example would be to tailor coaching and supports to individual needs. I know for me here, I do have a coach, and I don't feel like that engagement is really just a general engagement like that of my peers. My coach really tailors the needs that I have, like her coaching to the needs that I have, so that it can build on my growth in this space and my confidence in the space as well. Lastly, we'll discuss resource and the resource dimension. One way would be to identify and support champions within the organization who will be committed to training and support of lived experience employees. Next would be to involve people with lived expertise in all trainings and curriculum development, and not just those related to them. For this one specifically, I have seen a lot of times where people only center, organizations may only center the lived experience of a person, but we have to remember that they're whole people. They've had career experiences outside of the space or the role that they currently have. And they also have other skills and abilities that they can offer and bring to the table, which is why it's important to involve them in things that not only involve lived experience engagement. So for example, some other things that me as an employee brings to the table is my knowledge and skills around like racial equity, racial justice, and DEI practices. In addition to that, my knowledge and skills around like immigration related things and other areas. I bring more than just my lived expertise, and it's very important to honor that as you're employing and onboarding and engaging with people with lived expertise. All right, the next thing would be to develop a specialized hiring, training, and onboarding plan to bring those with lived experience into the organizational structure and to support them, to support their work. And lastly, integrate those with lived expertise into service delivery so that they are doing work of providing care and assistance. All right, next slide, please. Now we're going to go over some strategies to retain people with lived expertise. The first is clear and transparent communication. One strategy would be to ensure clear communication of the job description and role. The next would be to use language that's inclusive, affirming, and understandable. Next would be to make space for bidirectional feedback and anticipate and prepare for pushback. Look at pushback as an opportunity to unpack and open up conversations versus looking at it as opposition. It may very well enhance and grow how your organization is able to support lived expertise engagement, but also enhance service delivery. Continuously request feedback to improve organizational culture. The next strategy would be to integrate diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. One way you can do that is by developing shared language that removes that language barrier in the space. Create space for continued discussion and developing DEIA culture in the workplace. And lastly, enhance organizational knowledge and adolescence brain development, neurodiversity, and trauma-informed supports. Now, one thing I would like to lift up is at times people with lived experience may struggle with imposter syndrome, elitism, PTSD, and other mental health or trauma-based challenges. And this does have an impact on their ability to perform, and they may require additional supports. Some supports may look like offering therapy, providing a flexible work schedule, and socio-emotional support during coaching and supervision. Remember to have conversations with the individual to better identify what they need in their environment supports, and resources to help them thrive in the workplace. Next slide, please. Some additional strategies are to promote growth and development. One would be to offer trainings to enhance and develop new skills to utilize in and outside of the workplace. The next would be to provide peer-to-peer learning opportunities. And lastly, offer professional development opportunities, including goal setting and support to develop skills for higher positions and leadership. Another strategy would be to support well-being. Some ways that you can do this is by promoting psychological safety, creating safety plans and communication plans for when people are triggered. And that is very common for us to have at least experienced one traumatic event during our lifetime. So just plan for that, support planning for that. The next would be to support and discuss processes for activation and planning. And lastly, discuss and encourage a healthy work-life balance. Another thing I'd like to lift up is that you'll not only be considering their mental and psychological well-being, but also their physical and emotional well-being. Post-COVID, we were very reliant on technology. So things like protecting your eyes, taking a break to eat and drink, getting some sunlight, walking, getting some adequate sleep, and setting and communicating boundaries are also things that you may see people with lived experience needing reminders and support around. Providing guidance and support on balancing professional roles and responsibilities is another thing that they may need support with. So I said last thing last time, but there is actually one more last thing. That thing would be to consider creating opportunities in space for lived experience staff to connect and build community. I've been able to do that by scheduling coffee chats with my peers, where we're able to connect with each other on a more personal level. As we know, the work that we do this day in this work is hard work. So building those relationships and connections are really vital to how we are able to show up and support youth and families in this work, as well as each other. And you can also learn a lot from connecting with your peers. Next slide, please. So in the chat, please take some time to share some consideration you and your organization has when retaining people with lived expertise. Kelly, did you have some ideas around that before I lift up some of these questions in the chat?
Sure, Tiffany, I do. I know, speaking for myself, I am right now the only person with lived expertise in my agency. And so I'm very appreciative that my supervisor and my coworkers are super supportive and inclusive. So I'm really grateful for that. That's something that I feel like is important.
Thanks, Kelly. Thank you so much. So one of the questions in the chat, I'm gonna lift up one of the questions, then we can move on to the next slide and then create space close to the end to ask some more, okay? Is that okay with you, Kelly?
Yes, absolutely. Sounds great.
All right. So one of the questions is, how does an agency identify individuals who have lived expertise in their communities? That's actually a great question. Kelly, did you want to take a stab at it, or would you like for me to answer that?
Go ahead, Tiffany.
So I think it's very funny that you lift that up. And I actually was just having a conversation about the nuances of lived experience versus lived expertise. There is value in both, as Kelly had mentioned earlier. However, with the term lived expertise, what's happening is an organization or system is basically allocating power or a title to a person based on what they perceive that person's ability or expertise is. I do think that when you think about expertise, it's really about that person's ability to be able to navigate that system. So, so with that, I would be mindful to not not continue to focus on centering those voices that you feel like are polished in that way, because what helps bring a person from having lived experience to lived expertise is being able to have those opportunities to exercise those things learned, those lessons learned, those skills from the lessons learned throughout that lived expertise. And those opportunities to do that won't happen unless you're creating opportunities, inviting them to the space, creating opportunities to build their skills and centering their voices even when they're in that rough space. And there's opportunities to grow on that. One way that I would say is to connect with your community. Many people who are impacted by systems are connected to a lot of grassroots organizations and organizations in the community. Also, you have direct access to youth and families who are currently involved in the system. Take advantage of that. Another would be to maintain connections. Like, I know one jurisdiction I'm aware of, they have independent living events specifically. That's an opportunity to connect with young people who are directly involved or impacted by the system, and as well as their foster parents. But then there's other opportunities to connect with the families of those young people as well. So I hope that was helpful. And we can go to the next slide.
Thank you, Tiffany. So thinking back to the Capacity Building Center for States model for engaging people with lived expertise, one of the really important components of the support framework is to celebrate successes. And so we want to take this time to celebrate a couple of examples of organizational successes. This work does not happen overnight, and it takes commitment and dedication. So we want to highlight a couple of states that have had success with this work. So the first is Arizona, who started a youth mentorship program back in 2014. Then a few years later, with the help of support from the Center for States, they were able to build on that youth engagement. And then in 2020, the Department of Child Safety hired the very first 2 youth advocates. So Arizona's incredible work continues to grow and evolve. And then secondly, Washington developed their very own program by hiring a group of parents with lived expertise dedicated to helping other parents reunify with their children. In the very first 3 months, they had facilitated 5 families' successful reunification. They created a resource guide for birth parents and hosted their first annual Family Unity Day, bringing together caregivers, parents, and children to promote shared parenting. Next slide, please. So we would love to hear about other successes. So just as a reflection question, we want to ask, what are some of your organizational successes that you would like to highlight or share? If you could share those in the chat, we would be really appreciative. So I see that someone said that they offer grants to counties to create family voice councils at the county level. Someone else said that they have a parent partnership. Someone else said that they are implementing a group of on-the-job trainers who are seasoned workers who are assigned to work with new staff coming in. Someone else said that they hire family support specialists to help parents navigate. That's amazing. And if you have others to add, please keep putting those in the chat, and we will move on to the next slide.
Slide titled Resources contains hyperlink to family engagement, partnering with families to improve child welfare outcomes, Child Welfare Information Gateway. Hyperlink to Parent Partner Program, New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services. Hyperlink to System Level, Engaging Families as Partners in System Improvement, youth.gov. Hyperlink to the Benefits of Family Peer Support Services, Let's examine the evidence. National Association of State Mental Health Program Directors. Hyperlink to a tool for youth engagement and youth empowerment, Center for States, hyperlink to support services for youth in transition. Employment, Child Welfare Information Gateway. Hyperlink to webinar, Building Equitable Hiring Technologies and Practices, Annie E. Casey Foundation. Hyperlink to Youth Engagement Blueprint Series, Viewing Young People as Organizational Assets, Center for States.
So here we're sharing some resources and some tools that you can use to enhance your organization's ability to recruit, hire, and retain people with lived expertise in child welfare for both family engagement and youth engagement. The very first link takes you to the Child Welfare Information Gateway, and it provides useful insights into how to engage people with lived experience and lived expertise at the system level, program level, and at the community level. And then if you get a chance, check out the New Hampshire Parent Partner Program. And there's also a great article on equitable hiring practices. And we also included a youth engagement blueprint that's super helpful. So this slide deck will be made available following the event, so you guys can access these. Next slide, please.
On a continuation of the resources slide, the following are linked. Hyperlink to employment programs for young people with histories of foster care, creating a typology, comparative snapshots, and considerations for the field, Urban Institute. Hyperlink to how employment programs can support young people transitioning out of foster care, formative evaluation findings of 2 employment programs, Urban Institute. Hyperlink to parents who have been there help parents there now, Child Welfare Information Gateway. Hyperlink to YAP resources for youth, Arizona Department of Child Safety.
And I see more, there's other programs being mentioned in the chat, like Hawaii. Thanks you guys. Okay, so we wanted to provide lots of resources for you all. So we included several employment programs and resource links that are literally loaded with tons of great ways to start working on incorporating those with lived expertise. And so if you guys want to check those out, I think you'll really find them useful. So next slide, please. So before we ask for questions, I think Tiffany and I are both going to offer our one takeaway. So I think if I had one nugget to share on this topic, it would be that if you're going to incorporate people with lived expertise, do it wholeheartedly. You know, as they say, don't just talk the talk, but really walk the walk and plan and prepare so that you're successful. And focus on the value and contributions that these unique perspectives will bring to your table. Having those with lived expertise integrated in your workforce is going to be a positive thing. Tiffany, do you want to share yours?
Yeah, so I actually have 2. One would be that there's always opportunity to engage lived expertise, lived experience, whichever one you want to use. I would say don't focus on assessing organizational readiness is important, but there's also, it's building blocks. It's building blocks that you can take to get to that place of where you desire to be. But it maybe if you can't hire people with lived expertise, there's also other opportunities to engage with them and keep them engaged and involved and honor what they're contributing to this space. So don't get stuck in a place of we have to be perfect, we have to be at this place to do it. Just be intentional so that you're not creating harm, but that you're creating opportunity, you're being transparent, and you're steering away from transactional relationships and really working towards meaningful connections and relationships with youth and families.
Excellent.
Thank you. That was one, but it's a big
Go
one.
ahead, Tiffany.
The other one would be that be mindful of how you classify expertise. Several years ago, even to this day, some people may not look at me as the shiny person that, you know, they want to invite to a space. And remember, when you're doing that, you're perpetuating inequities within the system. So please just try to steer away from having your token people and really just connect with young people and families and really just, just come from a pure place. That's it.
Yeah, I love that. That's really important. So if you guys have questions, please put those in the chat. We would love to address those. And I will share that there was a couple of other really nice comments here. Our department has an equity accountability tool to support intentional reflection for decision making. That sounds amazing. Someone else said that they're partnering in 3 counties to provide the family peer mentor for the Ohio START program. You guys have a lot of great contributions in the chat. I don't see any direct questions right this minute, but I will say, oh wait, okay, I already said that, sorry. All right, so I think that pretty much wraps us up. We want to thank you guys for all engaging with us throughout this session. And if anyone, oh, I'm sorry, I screwed up. If anyone has any questions, this was the point where I was supposed to ask for them. Let's see if we have any. Okay. Let's see, I don't see any questions. So we will say thank you guys again for engaging with us. Please explore the Resource Center and chat with participants in the networking lounge. Tiffany?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for joining our session. And we hope that we can connect and you guys can utilize the resources in the Resource Center.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Slide says that this video was developed for the Child Welfare Virtual Expo by the Capacity Building Center for States and is sponsored by the Children's Bureau. Its content does not necessarily reflect the views and policies of the Children's Bureau.